Alright, so we're going to take an additional notes in genetics. We have originally taken some notes in understanding how we get traits and how traits from our parents are passed on to us. We kind of should understand the idea of dominance and recessive, and here we're going to look at some other types of dominance. But when we're talking about like dominance, we're really talking about something called alleles. And these are the traits that we receive from our parents. And when a human is created with a sperm and an egg, we receive one allele for each trait from our parents. And depending on how those two alleles match up, that determines the traits that we have. And we could have some dominant traits, we could have some recessive traits. And usually in a trait, when we look at just a trait that's controlled by a single allele, you will have one dominant part of that trait and one recessive. And usually dominance would be a capital letter like a capital W, and then we have recessive, it would be like a lowercase w. So we have these conditions where we can have two capital W's, homozygous dominant. We could have a capital W, lowercase w, which would be heterozygous. And then we can have two lowercase w's, which are called homozygous recessive. And homozygous just refers to the same. So same recessive allele. Then homozygous dominant, same dominant allele. Then heterozygous just tells us we have the two different alleles. But the thing to remember about dominance and recessiveness is whenever we have the dominant allele, whatever that trait is, it's expressed. And that's not always the case. So you know how nature is and how creation is, or living things are, that they don't always follow the rules. So we're going to look at some that do not follow the rules. So you make sure you understand them, and when you see them and you're not like puzzled by them. And so here we have something called incomplete dominance. So here usually it's like cut and dry. This is dominant over that. Here it's not so cut and dry, and we have this result in a blending of a trait. And so here, and a lot of times these can be flowers. This is a really common thing that we see. And in this, we would have a white flower and a red flower, and they result in a pink flower. Okay, but the thing to remember about these is the white is a homozygous dominant, the red is a homozygous dominant, but the pink is a heterozygous. Two dominant alleles, but it results in both traits being expressed as a blend. Okay, and here we have a new phenotype shown. So if we were going to do this cross, I'm going to do it for you here. We have a WW and an RR. We have a WR, 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 WR like that. Okay, here these are white. These are red. These ones here are pink. Okay, so we cross, and if you were doing this and you didn't understand it, you'd be like, I just crossed a white and a red and I got a pink. What happened to the white and the red? Because there's none of them expressed in this first generation, and they call this F1 generation. But what's interesting, if we did it again, if we took those same flowers and we took a WR and the WR, we would have a WW, WR, WR, and an R and an R. So here we'd have a white, here we'd have, these both would be pink, and this would be a red. So in the second, this is called the F2 generation, we have a reappearing of the traits. We have 50% of the new trait, the blend, and 25% of white and 25% of red. That's called incomplete dominance. So you have a blending of traits in incomplete dominance. Codominance is kind of similar, but here we don't have a blending, we just have an expression of both traits in the first generation. Okay, and again, we would have something like, and we end up with a stripe or a pattern type of thing that happens. And we're just going to go with like a white and a red. And that's going to give us a striped. Okay, very similar. Again, these would be your homozygous dominants, WW, RR. This would be a WR. And we kind of do the cross here. So WW, RR, WR, 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 WR. So here we took a white, we took a red, and we get a white, red, striped. So white and red is expressed, but not completely. So they share the dominance. So part of there's a pattern of white, red, white, red, white, red, white, red, just around the flower. Okay. Again, if we took these things and crossed them, this is our F1. If we did them again, we would have the same thing that we saw in the last one. A reappearing of traits. This is a pretty common thing, actually. So here we'd have just a white flower again. Here we'd have just a red flower again, and we'd still have 50% striped red and white. Okay, and that's called codominance, where the traits are still expressed and they haven't changed at all. But they're striped. They're just repeated pattern. But again, in the F2 generation, you see some of the original whites and reds reappear. Okay, then we have a couple things to discuss real quickly. We have polygenetic traits. Polygenetic traits are traits that are controlled by 2 or more genes. So sometimes it's not as simple as, W, a big W, or capital W, and lowercase w. Sometimes it's 2 or more genes that work together to control that, and we call that a polygenetic. So poly means many genes, and it can be more than 2. Okay, height is 1, I think, as well. In eye color, you can see her skin color. There's many things that go into your skin color and your eye color, so you can't just say it's 1 gene. It's many. Okay, and that's kind of that, polygenetic. And if we look at one other one, something called multiple alleles. Here we have something that's a little kind of similar to this, but here we have multiple alleles for a trait. So it's not just 2 possibilities. Here we can have 3. And here, in blood types are really common, and we're going to look at this probably next semester. I just want you to see this because it's kind of interesting. But here, for this trait, you can have an A, you can have a B, or you can have an O. And so you have not just, not just widow's peak or straight hairline, not just white or red, but you can have 3 different things. And then you can even add like Rh negative, Rh positive, and this gets kind of complicated. And we're going to look at this in blood type. I think you'll find it kind of interesting. And just remember, multiple alleles means more than 2 possible alleles for a trait. Because usually we're looking at W, capital W, lowercase w. But here we're looking at A, we're looking at B, and we're looking at O. So we have, now what does it mean when A and B are together? What does it mean when A and O are together? What does it mean when B and O are together? And so on. There's lots of different possibilities. Instead of just having these 4 things here, now we have 6. And it's kind of interesting. So that's kind of your other types of dominance. The most important ones to remember are incomplete and codominance. Keep these in mind, really what they mean for their definitions. And we'll talk more about this multiple alleles in the second semester. That's your notes. Make sure you add them, and I'll see you in class.